Hello and welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Open in Atlanta, part of the SCG Tour. I am Nick Miller alongside Ross Merriam. How you doing, sir?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Good to see you. We have Oath of the Gatewatch cards here.
Yep.
You have been writing about a blue-red Prowess deck for a couple of weeks here, ever since we started seeing some of the new cards. The deck looks great. You've been tinkering with it. We've got a whole bunch of new cards to talk about, starting off with the highlight, Storm Chaser Mage, Prowess. Another threat adding to the Prowess threat base here.
Yeah, Storm Chaser Mage sort of brings the deck up to a critical mass of cheap Prowess creatures that can serve as threats in this kind of a shell, whereas previously it just didn't have enough. With just Monastery Swiftspear and Abbot, with Storm Chaser Mage added to the mix, now we have enough to really form a complete threat base and make a deck. And then the other key addition, obviously, being the cheap cantrips to enable the Prowess creatures.
We got a bunch of cantrips here in the new set. Expedite as well as Slip Through Space, giving you the unblockable ability as well as 1 mana, draw a card, and Prowess to all your creatures. Very powerful additions here.
Yeah, Slip Through Space is definitely the more important of the two, and I think one of the key cards in the deck because it allows you to not have a lot of burn spells in your deck, so you can focus on having more efficient cards in those slots, because Slip Through Space can just deal them 8 damage out of nothing in combination with Titan Strength, or just with a big turn, casting maybe 2 slips on 2 different creatures, or flashing back a slip with a Jace. So Slip sort of functions as a burn spell in that respect, so that you can spend your other slots doing different things.
Right, the deck, these red decks in Standard right now don't have a ton of reach. They have a lot of these combo kills with Temur Battle Rage, Titan Strength stuff if you look back to a Tarka Red. And right now, you really don't have that much burn to go to the face. I don't think this deck has any of it, actually. So You're all based around the creatures, and Slip Through Space giving the unblockability. It's very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. That's what allows you to play Fiery Impulse instead of Wild Slash, so that you can actually kill 3 toughness creatures. If I didn't have Slip Through Space, then I would want a spell that I can go upstairs with and get a little reach that way. But with Slip, I feel more comfortable just playing Fiery Impulse, and then having an answer to Mantis Rider, to Catacomb Sifter, to Reflector Mage, to whatever else, Warden of the First Race, the other big one.
All in the main deck, you have those answers. Wild Slash relegated to the sideboard here in this deck. But also, when you get to run all these cantrips and all these cheap spells, of course, the main payoff, Treasure Cruise, a card that has just been busted. Every format, every deck you see it in that it can be supported in, you're playing it here, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Treasure Cruise get banned in the other 2 formats where we have a lot of cheap cantrips and fetch lands, and suddenly we have a standard format that has a lot of cheap cantrips and fetch lands.
Yeah.
So I fully expect someone to figure out Treasure Cruise and really unveil or unleash its power on a standard, and hopefully it's me this weekend with this deck.
Right, when you look at the spoiler and you see all the cheap cantrips and stuff, you know that just Treasure Cruise is out there waiting. We've seen it in the Ascendancy decks, you see it in the Jeskai Black decks. It's there just waiting to be used, and this deck looks to take advantage of it more so than almost any deck in the format.
Yeah, this deck, you rarely cast it for more than 2 mana, sometimes for 3, and I can count on one hand in the last week the number of times I've cast it for more than 3 mana. But you cast it for 1 and 2 many times. I've cast it for 1 mana, drawn another one off of that, cast the second one for 1 mana that turn, because I had 15 card graveyard or something like that. So, yeah, and whenever you can chain cruises like that on the cheap, you're going to very quickly bury your opponent in card advantage. And that's actually important in this deck because you don't have a ton of creatures. Right. So being able to recoup from losing your first couple creatures to removal spells is very important.
Yeah, the deck looks very similar to the Infect deck in Legacy, where you have 12 threats. That's it. You have to find your threats. You can find your threats this way and then deal damage. But one piece of contention in this deck, Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, a card that's just a no-brainer in almost every deck. A lot of people say it doesn't quite have a space here in this deck. It doesn't attack. But you are very much so in the camp of you want 4 of these, no questions asked.
Yeah, I am very adamant about Jace's place in the deck. I think without Jace, the deck would not be viable. And I think the cries for cutting Jace and playing a more aggressive creature like Zurgo is pretty common, maybe McKindy Slide Runner, just having another quick aggressive creature in that slot. The people calling for that, I think, at least from the comments I've gotten, they've said they view the deck very much as an aggressive deck.
Okay.
So they're viewing it through the same lens as like an Atarka Red, and I view it as a deck that has that kind of angle, but isn't linearly focused on that one angle. And Jace is one of the cards that opens up the other different angles of the deck to you, where you can grind someone out with Jace and Treasure Cruise. And flashing back a Treasure Cruise is otherworldly, but you frequently just flash back like a roast on their next guy, or flashback Titan Strength because you have the Battle Rage, but you've already Titan Strength earlier, or sometimes have double Titan Strength into a Battle Rage, and Jace lets you set up like those parts of the deck. And when you're trying to seamlessly transition between all these different game plans, being a control deck, being an aggro deck, being a combo deck with Titan Strength, the Team, or Battle Rage, the card filtering from Jace and the card selection from the -3 ability once it flips allow you to sculpt your draws towards any one of those 3 game plans, so you have enough going towards that one game plan out of 3 when you normally wouldn't, because your deck is a bit schizophrenic in the way the numbers look. So you need that kind of velocity and that kind of card filtering so you can fix your draws and sculpt your draws towards a specific game plan based on what your opponent's doing and based on what their draw has been during the course of the game.
All right, so the deck looks like an aggro deck, but you can play it in multiple different ways depending on your draw, how things come about.
Yeah.
Jace allows you to do that way easier than any other
Exactly,
card.
and that versatility is the hallmark of these types of aggro control decks. That versatility is what allows them to be so dominant when they're very good. The last time we saw this in Standard was Blue-White Delver,
sure,
and that deck was dominant for 8 months. And if you look at the way I have this deck constructed and the Blue-White Delver decks were constructed, it's constructed fairly similarly. The Delver deck was a bit more aggressive because you had more powerful aggressive elements, and if I had available to me better, very powerful aggressive elements, I'm sure this deck would skew towards the aggressive end too. But you can't just put those role players that are underpowered cards in your deck and expect this deck to perform. You need the most efficient and the most powerful cards at every single spot on the curve and in every single slot in your deck for the deck to be at its best.
Removal spells, of course, Roast and Fiery Impulse. You got a Counterspell and Dispel here. But the deck being blue-red, your mana gets to be pretty good. But also, most importantly, new card from Oath of the Gatewatch, Wandering Fumarole. This has been the most hyped creature land of the set, and here it looks to be very well positioned.
Yeah, I think Fumarole is very good. You want, again, a little bit of added threat density, and Fumarole gives that to you. If you look back to Blue-White Delver, they had Moorland Haunt as a sort of creature land, and Fumarole does the same thing here. I only have 2 copies because it's a 21 land deck, and you want a lot of enters the battlefield untapped lands, and so having one that enters tapped is a liability if you have too many copies of it. I started with 3, I went down to 2. I tinkered with the deck a little bit, trying higher land counts, but I think that anytime I ran more than 21, I just flooded it too often, and with 21, I still flooded a bit more often than I would have liked, which is why I added a singleton copy of Magmatic Insight, just another card that helps me not to flood too much, but Fumarole does that as well. And between Fumarole and Shivan Reef, now you have 2 blue-red dual lands, so the mana is pretty good. You can get yourself into a bind sometimes if you only have a 1 or 2 lane hand and one of them comes into play tapped, but it's not that bad. I would prefer it to be a little bit better. I think it's one of the weaknesses of the deck. The mana is probably only like a B+, and so but
Tap land doesn't seem like it would be that huge of an issue, as you only really have 4 1-drops you care about playing on the first turn. Most of your stuff usually comes online in the second turn.
Yeah, tap land is fine on turn 1. That's definitely the ideal time to play it, but it can get awkward if you draw it on turns 3 and 4, because you're constantly sifting through your deck, casting 1 mana spells, and you want to be using all your mana every turn. Mana efficiency on the first 4 or 5 turns in the game is very important for the deck, and anytime you have a come into play or enters the battlefield tap land, on one of those early turns, it can stunt your development. And if you draw multiples early, and Fumaroles make your battle lands come into play tap more often. So there's 2 battle lands in the deck, 2 Fumaroles. If you draw 2 out of those 4 in the early turns and 1 basic, having 2 lands that enter the battlefield tapped can be an issue.
Yeah, that could be a killer in terms of tempo. Let's move on to the sideboard here. You got a lot of familiar cards, more Dispels, Disdainful Strokes. We've seen these out of all the blue decks.
All the ramp decks are getting real hype, so I think Disdainful Strokes is going to be an important card for this weekend. So I have 3, which is more than you've seen in the last couple months out of any sort of blue decks.
Right, and it's interesting to see two Teamer Battle Rage in the sideboard. A lot of the Atarka Red decks trim some of their combo elements, but you're looking to go up on it, and you said ramp is one of the strategies where you just need to be fast.
Yeah, ramp is the primary one. Like their end game is the most powerful. They're casting Ulamog's or Kozilek's or flashing back Kozilek's Return with World Breaker, exiling your stuff, and have these big threats that can sometimes be resilient to counter magic. So being able to counter maybe an Ugin, maybe counter a World Break and only lose one of your creatures, or like counter an Engineered Explosives and slow them for a couple turns, and then finish them quickly with Titan Strength plus Battle Rage is an important element in that matchup. And so that's a matchup where you want the games to play out more like a combo deck than in other matchups, so we're going to skew our deck in order to have more of the combo pieces,
right.
And that's where the extra Battle Rages come in.
Roast, Wild Slash, more removal, and kind of pieces that kind of help you deal with certain decks.
Slash more for Atarka Red and other aggro decks. Roast more for the bigger aggro decks like Abzan, but pretty common there.
Got to deal with Siege Rhino somehow.
Yeah.
Arc Lightning and a Boiling Earth kind of deal with tokens, things of that nature.
I would have preferred to have two Boiling Earths, but there was literally only a single copy at all of the vendors, so we had to go with an Arc Lightning. I honestly it's possible that Arc Lightning is actually better.
Sure.
And I haven't tested a ton afterboard against red decks, but in theory crafting, I just want the cheapest spell for the effect. And with all the Wild Slashes and Fiery Impulses in the deck, I'm not that concerned about killing the individual creatures out of the Atarka Red deck, but I am concerned about dealing with the Dragon Fodders and Hordeling Outbursts. And so Boiling Earth is the card that does that most efficiently, but Arc Lightning still trades 1-for-1 with a Hordeling Outburst. It trades 1-for-1 with a Dragon Fodder while also dealing them extra point, or maybe killing another Goblin token, something like that. So not too big of a difference between those cards, but if I had my way, there would be a second Boiling Earth there.
Yeah, all dealing with things, but also, importantly, when your creatures are all prowess, not only are you dealing with the creatures, but it's also sort of a burn spell in conjunction with that. Two bigger threats here, Sarkhan and Apira and Kira Nalar, just kind of some more resiliency. Yeah,
sometimes if your opponent has a lot of removal spells, you want to bring in some bigger threats. PN Kirin is actually quite good against the rally decks, just getting some extra flyers and some extra removal in there spliced in. You can sack a token, kill a Jace, maybe put some pressure on an Antuco Husk if they try to extend that too early, kill a Grim Harrowspex. So there's a lot of stuff that the PN Kirin can do, and it just gives you a nice board presence against them. I think it'll be very good against any of the control decks as long as they don't bring in Radiant Flames against me, or Kozilek's Return if they have that instead. So if they don't have sweepers, then the PN Kirin's going to be great. But if they do, then I can go over the top of that with Sarkhan. Sarkhan is vulnerable to Crackling Doom, but given the number of Dispels I have in afterboard, I have 3 in the 75, I am reasonably likely to be able to set up a spot where they don't have Crackling Doom mana up, I resolve my Sarkhan, get in for 4, then they're forced to leave up their Crackling Doom, and now I untap and have Dispel mana open, I Dispel their Doom, and suddenly I have this big dragon threat. I mean, we've had 2 years of Stormbreath Dragon and 2 years of Thundermaw Hellkite. We all know what 5-mana haste dragons do.
Yeah.
They kill people.
Well, the deck looks very good. You've been hard at work on this deck, writing multiple articles, tinkering with it in your free time. We're at the first event. You got to buy.
Yep.
You get to put your money where your mouth is the rest of the tournament. So
we'll see
I wish you the
goes.
best of luck. Thanks for joining me here in the sideboard.
Thanks for
Stay
having
tuned
me.
to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Atlanta.